All right. Well, hello to all of you tuning in tonight. My name is Callie Kelsey, and I am the PTSA co-president at Degano Middle School. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Degano PTSA, My Gray Matters, and our amazing partners at Rady Children's Hospital. We have a very special event tonight with Dr. Paven Lidstone. And if you've been listening month after month, you may have heard Dr. Lidstone, along with a few of her incredible colleagues, share their wisdom just a few months ago. Before we get started, I would like everyone to know that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be shared in the near future on the Degano PTSA website. Okay, let's get started with some awesome introductions. Tonight, I have the honor to introduce an incredible woman that has dedicated her life to bettering the lives of others, specifically children here in San Diego, Miss Dominique Hensler. Dominique is the Senior Director for Care Redesign Planning and Mental Health Integration for Rady Children's Hospital. She focuses on transforming mental health and emotional well-being to improve the health status of youth and families, and believes that a focus on family-centered care is essential to transform care and improve the health of patient populations. Dominique, the floor is now yours to share all of the incredible things that Rady Children's is doing here in our community.
Thank you so much, Callie, and thank you for this opportunity to come back tonight to do part 2 with Dr. Lidstone, Dr. Shapiro, and Dr. Brer on practicing self-compassion. There really is nothing more important than whole person health and well-being. And at Rady Children's, one of the major initiatives we're focusing on is transforming mental health with a focus on the whole child, because mental health is just as important as physical health. So these opportunities to come with you tonight with a powerful panel of women who are also dedicating their lives and making such an impact to help our communities with tips and strategies so that we can practice them ourselves, take care of ourselves, put on our oxygen mask first, like they tell you in the airplane, and then we can do the most possible to help our children and raise our children with these techniques so that they can master them and be able to practice self-compassion and have a wonderful ability to thrive. So we're really excited to be here. This is very important to us as a health system organization to be able to partner with our community and our schools to be able to improve overall health and well-being. So thank you.
Thank you, Dominique, for everything that you do and everything that your team does to make these webinars possible and making San Diego a better place in the process. I, for one, am beyond grateful for every single one of you. As all of you know, you are tuning in this evening to tonight's presentation that's focused on the positive impact of cultivating self-compassion can have in our lives. And with us tonight, we have an incredible woman here to share her wisdom with us, Dr. Paven Lidstone. Paven Adjula Lidstone obtained her MD and PhD from the University of Illinois and completed her adult psychiatry training at the University of Pittsburgh. She is currently completing her fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at University of California, San Diego. I almost said UCSD. She has 15 years of research experience studying the developing brain. Her current clinical interests include developmental neuroscience, parent management training strategies, addressing healthcare equity, and the practice of self-compassion, which she will be discussing with us today. We are so blessed also with the presence of Dr. Desiree Shapiro and Dr. Simi Brar on our panel this evening, and we will be hearing more from them during our Q&A. Quickly, I'd like to remind everyone that the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen is available to you, so you can send questions in during the event that can be answered at the end. These questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, and then there's also a chat box so you can share your thoughts while the presentation is going. Dr. Lidstone, I am honored to turn the time over to you for your incredible presentation, and once again want to thank you for being back with us tonight to share more of your wisdom on the practice of self-compassion.
Thank you so much, Callie, and everyone for having us back. Really happy to be here to talk about part 2 today on the practice of self-compassion. And this slide deck was created primarily by Desiree Shapiro. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and she's here on the panel as well. So just to start out with, in terms of disclosures, we have no disclosures about this project. And I'm having an interesting mouse situation. So hopefully, can you see my mouse when I move it? Yeah, okay. So something that kind of comes up in terms of compassion, when we think of compassion, we think about kind of automatically, usually our compassion for other people. That's sort of like a connotation, I think, of the term. And so something to consider that Dominique mentioned about the oxygen mask, we have to have compassion for ourselves in order to really completely have compassion for others. So if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. Sure, there we go. So for today, since this is part 2, some people might not have been present for the first part. I wanted to review the model of self-compassion as described by Kristen Neff to give a kind of framework for what we're talking about when we say that phrase. And so it'll be a little bit of a review, but I think it's helpful to have, an understanding of that before we move forward. And then we'll talk about some kind of practical strategies or tips, or I'll kind of, I think at that point, invite you to consider how you might add self-compassion into your own life, and think about that as we move forward and talk about these strategies. And then we're going to end with a reflection. Danielle will put the link in the chat. It's just a short questionnaire. The answers don't really go anywhere. No one looks at them. It's just sort of a way to kind of consider and reflect on. So it's a scale to sort of for you to reflect on your own assessment of where you're at in terms of the practice of self-compassion. I know when I started this, I was not doing a very good job of it, I think. And so sort of attracted to the idea of it. And it's been a very interesting journey in thinking about this more. So I kind of invite you all to take this journey with me, to no matter where you are on the spectrum of things. And then we'll end with some discussion with our panel here. I'd like to sort of open up by sharing this quote. For some reason, we are truly convinced that if we criticize ourselves, the criticism will lead to change. If we are harsh, we believe we will end up being kind. If we shame ourselves, we believe we end up loving ourselves. It has never been true, not for a moment, that shame leads to love. Only love leads to love. So, yeah, I think this quote is important because we can also think about this in terms of parenting as well. And so I invite you to kind of think about that. We can talk more about that as we go along. And some of the topics we bring up here, even as I read that quote, it can be challenging to take a minute in our busy lives to sort of reflect on these things. And for some of us, it's maybe the first time we've thought of this for a while, maybe a day, maybe a week, maybe a month. So I encourage you all to take care of yourself and remember that everything is optional in terms of the chat, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, and to be kind to yourself. And I think everyone came to this session or is watching this session that's recorded for a reason. And I ask you to just take a moment to just consider what is your reason, and answer the question in your own mind. Why are you here? So the model that we're going to talk about today, that's that's presented by Kristen Neff, it focuses on these three components of self-compassion. She's a mother of a child with autism, and so I'll put her, I think the slides might be shared, and her website is also at the end in the resource slide. It might be a good resource to look back on to look at her work and some of the work that she's done, but basically it's drawn on the writings of Buddhist teachers, and she has divided into three main components: self-kindness, a sense of common humanity, and mindfulness. And we're just going to review each component individually now. So we'll start with mindfulness, which is not easy, and we're going to address this a little bit later because the term mindfulness has been kind of thrown out a lot in pop culture now. I think there are a lot of kind of connotations to it, but essentially we can define it as paying attention to the present moment without judgment. And in the sort of practice of self-compassion, you could consider, am I stressed in this moment? What is going on, and sort of having the psychological flexibility, which we're going to talk about, to take a step back and consider, am I present? Am I here? So that's the question that you can ask yourself when you're thinking of mindfulness. And another part to self-compassion is kindness. Am I being kind to myself? Am I treating myself as I would a friend? The third is common humanity. Seeing the experience of ourselves as part of a larger human experience. So the question to ask is, am I remembering that I am not alone? This can be helpful when we're having, kind of stuck in our own thinking and having trouble connecting with this sort of theory or concept of self-compassion. And we know that there are benefits. I mentioned this in the first session about self-compassion, and that it's not just kind of feeling good, which it can, but it also kind of has long-term benefits in terms of our ability to regulate our emotions, to teach others, our children, how to regulate their emotions, to decrease burnout and compassion fatigue for others. It can lead to healthier behaviors, more sustainable, healthy behaviors, and lead to kind of the idea of resilience or persistence after failure. There's some literature from neuroscience has shown that it can help to activate the pathways of reward and motivation in the same ways that exercise can, and that certain medications we use can. So it's a very helpful strategy. And it can also improve social relationships because when you're kind to yourself, it's easier to have, I think all these things are tied together. It's easier to have more compassion for others. And so these are some ways or strategies that people have used to consider and use self-compassion throughout the day. I think it could be helpful to kind of think about moments that are challenging in each day, times that are hard, and think of what could be helpful to you individually, and then try one out. So some of the suggestions that Kristen Neff uses is writing a letter to yourself, in the moment, physically holding your heart or rocking your body, giving yourself a hug, even stroking your arm, and just kind of noticing that this is a difficult moment and acknowledging that with your own physical touch. So that's what physical touch means. And then we're going to talk a little bit now about the idea of mindfulness and meditation and this practice of psychological flexibility, which has become an interest of mine lately. Part of why it's become an interest of mine is that I've noticed that a lot of therapies have used this this idea of psychological flexibility. So a lot of the therapies that we use in our clinics to help parents, to help children, to help adults deal with emotions, tough emotions, revolves around this idea of psychological flexibility, which is essentially the understanding that we can have anxiety or negative thoughts or feel overwhelmed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we are defined by those thoughts, and that it's possible actually to be able to be mindful in the moment and to take a step back and realize that initially that what you're experiencing is an anxious thought, and to be able to kind of see that thought without judgment and experience it. And so that I think is kind of what mindfulness, when we talk about mindfulness, what it is. I think somehow it's sort of translated into this idea that mindfulness is like super relaxing, and it can be relaxing. I think probably when you get good at it, and when it certain times it can be relaxing, but actually the practice of mindfulness and the psychological flexibility can be quite difficult. And so one of the sources of this, I'll put some quotes up in a moment to help people kind of better understand how I'm defining psychological flexibility. But one is from Stephen Hayes. He's the creator of ACT therapy. And the idea that he brings up in terms of psychological flexibility is that we've created rules for ourselves that we don't even really kind of understand or know about. These rules are things we saw as children, the rules our parents had that we've internalized. And so it can be kind of helpful to start to understand the rules that we've created, because they can actually kind of hold us back. So that's a component of psychological flexibility, is kind of understanding that there are rules that drive our thoughts. Another reading that I've done is a book, actually after we had the last session, I was sort of attracted to this idea of the power of discord. Someone brought up a question, I think it was Callie, about, we are sometimes challenged with our children when they push us and we don't always make the right call or say the right thing. And so, there's this idea that I think it's challenging to be compassionate if you have an idea that you can't make a mistake, or that certain things should be a certain way with parenting or with your children. And this book, The Power of Discord, talks about the idea of mismatch and repair. So the versus perfection. What I mean by that is, rather than striving to always do the right thing, the idea that when we do the wrong thing, or the thing that is not in connection with our child, we're able to recognize that mismatch, acknowledge it, and repair it. And that process that starts very early, that Dr. Brar, I'm sure, will talk to us about, and has spent a lot of time thinking about the early connection that we make with our infants when we are trying to understand what they're trying to communicate, when they have no words and they're crying. And we can all relate to that kind of feeling, like, what do you want? And that's how the mismatch and repair is built over time. And so I think that that's an interesting part of psychological flexibility, because what it's talking about is recognizing first that rule that we've created to always be sort of perfect, or strive for perfection, and then maybe try to adjust the rule to something else. And I'm going to talk about this picture in a moment. It's hard for me to see all the words because of my chat boxes here. But yeah, so these two images, I think, can be helpful in terms of the idea of psychological flexibility, because we can think about mindfulness and the meditation of mindfulness as sort of, for example, in the waterfall here, the the water is falling from this waterfall are like all the thoughts that we have all the time that are running through our mind. And if we can start to practice visualizing, standing actually in a cave behind the waterfall and watching the water fall in front of us. So again, this idea of being separate from the thoughts that we have, that they do not define us and that they're occurring and that we're watching them fall, but it's not who we are. I think that visualization can be helpful when we think about what mindfulness is. So it's perhaps not sort of just relaxing and thinking nothing, which is actually really hard to do, but rather acknowledging the thoughts that you have and having a little bit of distance from them. So that's kind of the concept I'm hoping to convey here. Another visualization that's on the right here is a hurricane, and you can see, at the eye of the storm, there's a calmness, and the thoughts you could visualize are sort of wrapping around you, if that's sort of better than the waterfall, and you're in the calm center. So you can see the thoughts, but they're not necessarily defining you in that moment of mindfulness. So I'm going to share some quotes from the book that might be a little bit more helpful. It's a lot of words here, but I'm hoping that it will help to define this. So psychological flexibility is the ability to feel and think with openness, to attend voluntarily to your experience of the present moment, and to move your life in directions that are important to you, building habits that allow you to live in accordance with your values and aspirations. It's about learning not to turn away from what is painful, instead turning toward your suffering in order to live a life full of meaning and purpose. So that's like a pretty grandiose, large sort of big idea concept that's very hard to do, actually. But the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because the first step of living towards kind of the best part of ourselves, or who we want to be, starts with first noticing what actually is happening. And that's the component that I'm talking about of psychological flexibility. And the rest is sort of the benefit of what might happen when we do that. And the second quote is, the central shift is from a focus on what you think and feel to how to relate to what you think and feel. The new emphasis is on learning to step back from what you are thinking, notice it, and open up to what you are experiencing. These steps keep us from doing the damage to ourselves that efforts to control our thoughts or feelings inflict, allowing us to focus our energies on taking the positive actions that can alleviate our suffering. So this component of psychological flexibility addresses the concept of noticing what you're thinking and opening yourself up to it, which is a component of self-compassion, I think, where you're using non-judgment. So this is kind of the connecting mindfulness to this, and self-compassion to the idea of psychological flexibility. So basically, it means that we're kind of facing what we're thinking without judgment, which is challenging. And we can kind of talk a little bit about what questions people have about that, because I'm sure it's sort of easier said than done. But I think maybe practically speaking, if you consider a moment where you're very overwhelmed, and just kind of noticing what is happening rather than being sort of just feeling the feeling, I guess. So an example I can give is, just this morning when I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they were both, I think one had just dumped a cup of milk on the ground. The other one had, it was just, there was a lot of vocalizations that were getting very loud. And I noticed that I was getting very overwhelmed, and that I was feeling like I could not control what was happening. and sort of and I'm working on this, I'm starting to practice this. And I think whereas I would have immediately tried to control what was out of my control, kind of noticing that I felt so out of control that my body actually was like responding in a stressed out way, like starting to sweat and just like, I have to get ready for work. Now I got milk on my work pants, and it's, these things that happen to us pretty often. It sort of can allow a person to switch from what they might automatically do because of a rule that they had created. So hopefully that example offers a little bit of practicality to these long quotes. Yeah, and we could talk a little bit more about psychological flexibility as we go on, but I'm hoping that at this point we could, Danielle will put the link in the chat. I don't know, I can't see it, so I think she's doing it. And this should take about 5 minutes to do. I think that was enough time, Callie. Okay. Okay, so hopefully that kind of brought some feelings to the surface, or helped folks to sort of see where they're at in terms of self-compassion and how we are defining it by this model. And now I would like to kind of challenge you all to think about one particular, and feel free to share it in the chat if you'd like, one thing you will do as a result of what you've heard, or some of the strategies that I talked about in terms of physical touch or affirmation, in order to kind of practice self-compassion, and maybe specifically, as we talked about, mindfulness and psychological flexibility. And I think, with that, I will open up questions from the Q&A that was prepared earlier. And just want to mention here that these are the resources I mentioned last time, that there's Kristen Neff's website, which is really good. And then there's some really nice guided meditations for kids and some mindfulness videos for kids. So to how to translate some of the stuff with that we talked about for younger folks who might be a little bit better at some of this, actually, because their minds are a little bit more flexible than ours in some ways. A new resource here is the mindfulness courses at UCSD, which I recently learned about. So that's another link there if people are interested in learning more about that kind of practice. And yeah, with that, I'll open up to questions.
Dr. Lidstone, thank you so very much. I have to say that self-reflection was really helpful for me personally. I thought I was kind to myself. I thought I was like, mostly nice to myself. And as I was answering the questions, I stepped back and kind of thought, I really could do different in these different ways. So I appreciate you implementing that into tonight's webinar. And I also I put down 2 quotes that I just love so much that you shared. One was at the very beginning, and I don't remember who said it, but it was, if compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. And then it was, shame does not lead to love, only love leads to love. That was such a powerful quote that I just felt the need to share that one more time with everybody, because how often, especially as parents or even just in friendships or relationships, like judgment comes out and the blame or the shame can come in without you even realizing it. But when you step back and you just remember that shame does not lead to love, only love leads to love. Like at least for me, I feel like it can stop me and recognize, like, if I'm not doing this action with love, then you might want to step back and think about it, Callie. And that's me talking to myself, by the way. But like, what a powerful thing. And I'm not sure where I wrote the other quote down right now. So I'll go to questions until that point. But I just love, I love the perspective of, instead of running away from the painful and scary things, you stop and you recognize them and you like acknowledge them, feel them, but kind of like you said, like behind the waterfall, you're aware that they're there, but look at it from a mindful perspective so that you can, take it in and then respond with love, whether it's to yourself, to your children, or anyone else. And that was the other thing. Every single one of these lessons that's kind of focused on children is such a great opportunity to take and implement that same thought process into every single relationship in your life, with yourself and with your parents and everyone else. So I know I just said a lot, but I felt like there were just so many things that needed to be honored that you spoke about tonight. So thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to be here. So with that, let's go to questions. The first question that I have, actually, you know what? Joni wrote a question here in the Q&As. So I'm going to have hers. I'm going to surprise you guys with one from Joni. And she said, "This is awesome. Thank you for the great info. When you notice the negative reaction or feeling you are having, how do you shift it to make you feel, shift if it makes you feel guilty you felt that way? I guess you observe that emotion too." Did you guys understand that? I messed it up a little.
Yeah. Does someone else want to respond since I've been talking, or if you don't feel strongly, I can.
You can start it off if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think that is exactly kind of what happens, right? It's a chain of, we don't just have one thought, we have a waterfall of thoughts, and the challenge is really to observe them all. It's a practice and it takes time, but I think exactly, you answered your own question. So you feel negative. Let's see, I think if I can think of an example right off the top of my head. Say you feel like negative towards your spouse or something, or your partner, and you're observing how you're really just feeling really negative in that moment because they keep forgetting to do this one thing that you've asked them to do a million times. I'm not speaking from personal experience. And then you notice that you feel bad. I think just kind of continuing to watch where that takes you. And one thing that I didn't say that's really, I think, a helpful shift that this question reminds me of is to approach this kind of thing with curiosity rather than judgment, or even rather than observation. It's like taking to the next level. Like, well, that's really interesting that I am so curious about why it is that I keep having this kind of repeated pattern with the same thing. I know that he always leaves this thing here. And I know that this is played out a million different times, 300 days of the year. And it's so interesting that I still have that same, and so that kind of curiosity, I think, can kind of help to shift away from judgment. I don't know if that is helpful, but it's something that a lot of practices in modalities and therapies that we use offers that perspective of psychodynamics, CBT, DBT, all the acronyms, ACT. So yeah, but I'm interested to hear what Dr. Shapiro, Dr. Breyer have to say.
That's such a great answer, Dr. Lidstone. And I think I would add is that negative emotions or painful emotions or icky emotions are part of life. And it's sort of this idea that we always have to have happy or easygoing feelings, and that's not true. And that sort of sets us up for feeling badly or guilty or shameful when we have negative emotions. So sort of embracing all that is life. And then exactly like you shared and like Dr. Lidstone said, is sort of to lean into that in a really kind and curious way, which is incredibly hard. But strategies to sort of address the guilt could be like what Callie said, is talking to herself, talking to ourselves, using language that really resonates and feels right and authentic to us. Like, darling, that's really hard. You're not alone. Things will pass. Things will get better. So creating statements or sort of gestures for yourself that really feel right can remind yourself in that moment where we can so easily get stuck in that spiral of negative guilt, shame, but to really give ourselves the kindness that we need to accept and move on and see that life is just full of all sorts of emotions, and we need to embrace that.
I think the only thing I would add, and obviously you guys have kind of covered it and touched upon so many important points, is just the idea that those thoughts that come up in those moments, whether it's something to do with your spouse or your child, or I'm a bad mom. I think that's a classic one that comes up. All right, bad parent. Is it's a micro moment too, right? It's a micro moment in how many thousands of hours. I used to know this, how many thousands of hours we parent up until 18, and then we don't stop parenting at 18, right? I'm still parented with my mother that's made it to 48 years of marriage today. So that continues, right? It's lifelong parenting, but to give us yourself some grace in those moments, and to remind us that it was a moment, and what was the intentionality. I think that's really important, right? Like Dr. Lidstone talked about, most parents' intentions and most people's intentions are benevolent, right? There's good intentions behind it. So to remind ourselves that maybe that voice was coming from somewhere else. Maybe that's the voice of something greater outside of me. Maybe that's a voice from the past, right? But what was my intention in that moment? And this was a moment. So let me just separate. Again, you're kind of separating and you're thinking about your thoughts, right? Higher level order than letting your thoughts be you. So yeah.
Well, and there's something I love what you said about the micro moments. Thank you so much, Dr. Burr. But there's something that I learned a few years ago that really resonated with me too, which was I don't have control over so much that, seems like it would be great if I did have control over, but really I think I would be way too overwhelmed. So I have little control over so many things. And when you get in that thought process of like feeling overwhelmed because of the situation at hand, whether it's the kids spilling the milk or the dogs pouring the flowers out or whatever it is, um, just recognizing it in that moment, and whatever it is that you're feeling really stressed about, putting it in a box. And this is not a real box, this is a pretend box, but it's a box that you can literally just take and put up on the shelf and say, I don't know how I feel about this at this moment. I'm feeling really overwhelmed, but I have no control over the situation. So I'm just going to put the overwhelm and stuff in the box. And if I feel the need, I'm going to take that box out later and look at it again. But the minute that in my mind, I've put that in a box, I kind of have that same separation that we're talking about, where you're behind the in the eye of the storm, but it's calm there. Like you're able to take that emotion and just put it aside until one, you're ready to look at it again, or two, ready to say, oh, I didn't even need that box anyways. Like, let's just let it be. So anyways, that's something that's really helped me in my life, and I've attempted to teach my kids when, again, they don't have control over all the things. Especially, we've learned that in the past year, right? Whether it's not going back to school or whatever else. So I figured I'd throw that 2 cents in, and I appreciate all of the wealth of information that you guys are sharing. And that brings me to the next question, which is, psychological flexibility seems difficult to wrap my head around. Can you please simplify what it means to be psychologically flexible?
Do you guys want to answer that? I feel like I kind of talked a lot about it. Maybe there's a different way. I mean, I think I could just say sort of simply first, that what we're talking about is really the idea that we are not defined by what we think, and to be able to take a step back and observe that there is a thought to begin with, that that's not who we are, but it's a thought we're having, and to see that as separate from ourselves. That's kind of like, I would say, sort of the first step, or the concept of psychological flexibility. And sort of the next level that's a little bit more challenging is trying to understand and be curious about what the thought is, and maybe the rule that we've created that is related to that. But when you start thinking in that way, you may start to notice patterns, and to be kind of kind to yourself about the patterns, and in a way to kind of, I guess, escape from whatever is really like holding us back.
I can just add in, when you just say that term, I kind of think like, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And for me, I'm thinking psychological flexibility. So just openness. It's like the first words that are just popping into my brain right now. Being open, right? Really being open to everything, intrapersonally, so within me, and then interpersonally, within that space between me and someone else, that space between me and the tree, me and earth, me and the rain, me and this universe, right? Transcending just that space even between me and another human being, but all this energy and all this space, and just being really open to it, because there's stuff going on in here, but there's also stuff going on between here. um, and so I think the more openness, the more ability to think about different possibilities, right? It doesn't there isn't always just one answer. Sure, 1 + 1 is 2, but we can change that around, right, into different ways to get to 2. um, and so it allows us to, I think, perspective taking. That flexibility allows us to think about other people and to have perspective, not only for ourselves but for others. To kind of it opens the door for some empathy too, right? To really be thinking about what someone else might be experiencing, and the curiosity, right, which is what Dr. Lidstone said was a key point to psychological flexibility. And I think, gosh, if we could just give all of us, we all had these huge doses of curiosity. Every single morning I drank my curiosity juice. The day would be very different, because curiosity is going to then spread and be, like this amazing virus that would spread into all of us. And with curiosity comes openness and comes empathy. And we're really thinking through like what really happened in that scenario or that situation. And then you keep asking, like Dr. Lidstone was saying in therapy, I'd have mentors that, I'd be like, oh, well, I'm going to make this association. I'm thinking that. And I'm thinking this person did this because of this. And their mom did that. And that's why. And he's like, well, how do you know? Like, how do you really know? Keep asking, Simi. Keep asking. Keep getting curious. And you will know. Eventually, you will find out, or you'll help that person know, right? Because it's really their truth. It's your truth. It's not my truth. It's our own inner truths that we're kind of looking for.
Just pausing and soaking up all of that wisdom, Dr. Brar. It reminds me of a beautiful talk. I can share it in the link, but the dangers of a single story and how that openness can lead to so many more perspectives like you shared. And when Dr. Lidstone broke down psychological flexibility so well, I was thinking about like awareness without immediate changing. So being aware and just in that moment, just relinquishing control, like Callie is saying, and accepting. And then in later times, change may occur. So some people think, okay, I can be aware without changing, but that awareness and that curiosity and that acceptance can later lead to change for the better, for positive change that we may need, like self-compassion. And then I also thought of just like dancing and surfing and like there's a meditation where you put a leaf on the water and you sort of put your feeling or your thought on there and it floats by, similar to the beautiful examples Dr. Lidstone gave, but just more images, which usually helps me understand complex concepts and this one's really core to multiple psychotherapies and therapeutic interventions. So that's what I would add. Awareness without immediate change.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you to all three of you for your wisdom, just that openness. And I just really appreciate all of your different perspectives on the same issue or the same thought too, So thank you for that. We have another question from one of our from someone that's here with us tonight. And it is there a way to forgive yourself for something you did or said in the past that hurt someone? Do you always need to get help from a therapist? Dr. Lidstone, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I can. I mean, I think the short answer is no, you don't always need to get help from a therapist. I think that when we start asking ourselves and start being curious about our own thoughts, or the first part was about forgiveness of something that's happened. Is that right? And see if I can find I don't see it in the Q&A. But I think the first part of sort of forgiving ourselves, I'm trying to put it in the framework of psychological flexibility, is maybe understanding what occurred and reflecting on what maybe you as an individual may need in order to kind of resolve that or forgive yourself, and then kind of working from there to kind of stepwise problem solve, but always kind of checking in with yourself, maybe stepping back from the emotion. Sometimes time can do that, as we have conflict and time changes things. When we start to reflect, sometimes we look back on the way things went and maybe have that time and space, and that allows for psychological flexibility. So I guess I think forgiveness and working through that kind of thing starts with forgiving ourselves, and then kind of working from there.
I think it's such a great question. And we've all done something to hurt someone. And there are really beautiful meditations there. I was trying to find the forgiveness one. I can share it out. We use it with our medical students often. And it's a really nice way to acknowledge the different levels of hurt that may occur and to come to peace and acceptance with that. And there's also the loving kindness meditation that was shared out in the first session. So your question about therapy is an interesting one. So I have the perspective that there's so many ways to promote wellness that doesn't necessarily have to equate to like traditional mental health care. That is so important, and psychiatry and therapy is essential for many. But maybe some parts of you really need spiritual attention. Maybe there is exercise, movement, dance. There's a lot of different ways that you can promote your own personal well-being and sort of address what you might need, in addition to checking in with doctors and people who you care and love and trust to check in to see, do I need additional help? But we can all be working on our well-being every single day.
I love that, just using the body and the movement, right? Like we forget sometimes that like we can only, like, is it only through words that we heal? But it's not. I mean, there's this whole body that we carry with us and we can do so much with it. So I think the thing I would add is just to remind yourself in this mindful moment that to err is human, right? It's a part of our humanity. We make mistakes. So now what does a mistake mean? Is a mistake, I did something really bad and now I'm bad, or is a mistake an opportunity, right? An opportunity for change and reflection and growth. And sure, it hurts. And I think that's why we have guilt, right? There's this emotion of guilt because we need that for humans so that we don't go around really doing things that are maybe terrible without any consequences. So some guilt is good and is normal, right? When we drown in our guilt and our guilt turns to shame, then we're kind of stuck and we want to come out of that. So I think reminding yourselves of that and knowing that we're not pre-programmed, right, to do everything perfectly. It's not possible. But the other ways to connect too is if it's not, and I don't think everyone needs to. Part of me always thinks like everyone should have a therapist. That'd be wonderful. Like again, if you had your curiosity juice in your therapist, but it's about that relationship, right? Too. So where else can we get that? I think we get that in these micro moments from our relationships throughout the day, every day, and it's not always your therapist, it's your friend or your spouse or somebody that you got grocery from, the clerk, that you can have this moment. So how do we connect more to people in our circle and in our community? Back in the day, elders told stories and people didn't have TV and cell phones and social media, right? You connected through humans and through relationships. So I think part of the healing too is in some relationship that we should find, like we can find. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but yeah, unless it comes to a point, right? Like Dr. Shapiro was saying, there's a time and place that I think it's probably more necessary.
Thank you again for all of your wisdom and insight into that. I know that
Yep.
I actually love going to see a therapist when I feel like I know I don't have all the answers, but when I feel like I want to gain more insight and wisdom, kind of like what's happening tonight, because just getting another perspective from someone that knows more than I do in that specific realm is very helpful. So I appreciate all the things that you guys are sharing tonight, whether it's the meditations or TED Talks. Oh, and Dominique has something to add in there, and I'd love to hear.
Well, so that observation that you just said, Callie, I think the talk tonight gave us a different perspective on how to reframe things. The curiosity, to take a step back and be an observer and redefine how we interact and how we observe things and not beat up on ourselves. So I grew up in a generation where I can remember, uncles and aunts and grandparents and parents telling us, first and foremost, you should be ashamed of yourself if you spilt the milk, right? Like that was a big offense in my house if I spilled something. And so you get programmed to think, oh my God, I did something wrong. Therefore, I'm hard on myself. But you guys are saying, no, show yourself some grace and reframe it and your empathy to yourself. And by doing that, by being more of an observer, it takes, I think, some of the wind out of the sails of overanalyzing, beating yourself up, and being hard on yourself and hard on others. And if we can also teach our children that reframe, it may also foster more empathy, as I think we're seeing less and less empathy because of how disconnected we've got with social media and such, and the rise also in bullying in younger ages. So I don't know, I just think information is power. My daughter, who was severely bullied in high school, developed a panic disorder. And the thing that helped her when she felt like she was being attacked by a bear at the cave and she's just in full-on panic mode was information and power and reframing. And I explained to her what was happening to her chemically, physically, and you just are patient, you love them through it. And, here we are 5 years later, she's in her 20s. And if something triggers and she starts to get panicky and anxious, she knows what's happening and she can help to reframe it. So I think you guys have brought that to this concept as well with self-compassion and mindfulness that can be the key to a lot of issues. So thank you.
Yeah,
That's my 2 cents.
So much so that I feel like when we acknowledge our parts and things or our hard things, and then acknowledge the other half of that, which is everybody has hard things. We just have different hard things. That gives us the opportunity to then have that empathy towards ourselves and towards others, because my stuff might not look the same as Dr. Shapiro's stuff, which might not look the same as Dr. Brar's stuff, but we've all got hard things. So recognizing and acknowledging it where it is and what it is, and having that compassion and empathy towards ourselves and others gives us the chance to move forward in a healthy and positive and more connected way in all the relationships that we have. So thank you, and thank you, Dominique, for your insight there. It was really needed and really appreciated. Here is another question that I have. Is there a quick way to change your mindset? For example, is there something that you say or do to stop your mind from wandering to a place of judgment, blame, or shame? And I know that we've kind of gone over that a little bit, but do you guys have any like quick tips and tricks that, like a hair thing on your wrist where it's like, stop it, Callie, stop telling yourself that, or, something that you guys could recommend or that you do in your life that might benefit anyone listening right now?
I can go. So I think, I think of what I do with myself, but there is an internal dialogue. And what I have kids that I'm working with, or even my own findings. So for me, it's when that happens, and it happens, I don't know, every day, every other day, there's moments throughout the day that's happening. Often it's in terms of parenting, and that bad mom thought surfaces. And so the thing that I say is I'm like, whoa, girl. I mean, that's the thing that I say. It comes into my head and it's just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I either say, whoa, 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 Simi, or like, whoa, girl, slow it down. And that's just, it sounds silly or something, but in that moment, it's just something I connect to. And it's an automatic, it just kind of comes up in that moment when I'm thinking of like, oh, you're a bad mom right now, or how could you have just done that? Or you spent your whole day doing this and your kids just wanted 5 minutes. And so I try to, when I'm working with my kids or other kids too, or even parents, is some sort of saying something that you can kind of then use. I have a little girl that says, I think she says like the monkey came down the tree, like every time something comes up and she's like, the monkey's visiting. And so we all know what that means, the monkey's here. And that's kind of her cue, and that's her visualization that she has in that moment. So I think you can do whatever, make it what you want, that kind of speaks to you.
I think some components that can help for the minds for the switch is using a little bit of humor, either to yourself or that would kind of help to shift it, or physical touch. So those are two ways that have kind of been studied that actually that help with the mindset switch. And I would say agree that it's totally an individual thing, and practicing what works, hand to the heart, hand to the pulse. Sometimes I've noticed recently that I've been started checking my pulse almost as a, just a, yeah. So I think that can be helpful. Yeah. Dr. Shapiro, do you have any other
I'm
tips?
not giving you like magic wand tips, but I think that if you're questioning whether you need to change your mindset, like that's beautiful because it's awareness. And so then, like everyone has said, like create your own individual way that really makes sense to you, that feels good to you, and that can be kind instead of harsh, because we have to be kind. And if you need to change space, change physical space, go outside, get a change of scenery, change anything up to sort of remind yourself that there can be distance there.
Thank you so much. One thing that I do consistently is proprioception. So like when you're saying something or like getting overwhelmed, you can squeeze your hands together or pull them apart, or kind of like pat yourself, which seems really weird. I'm sure people have laughed at me watching from afar, but it's helped me stop in that moment and redirect, or change the perspective or the thought at the moment. But I love what Dr. Shapiro said too, by just saying be kind. So almost, the minute that you start telling the stories or the judgment starts coming out, whether it's towards yourself or others, like stopping and just thinking, am I being kind? Is this a kind thought? Is this a kind act? Is this a kind thing? If not, stop and do something different, right? Doing something different is very beneficial in situations like this too. Okay, and now we're on to our last question, which is, can you touch a little more on the positive impacts that self-compassion has on our relationships with others, the world, with work, etc.? What can I do to let my guard down so I have the opportunity to connect more when I am with my family?
So I think there's two questions in there, right? Like one is how to let your guard down, and then there was another question on.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, how can you let your guard down and use that opportunity to let your guard down to then connect more?
Okay, so I guess, yeah, I'm trying to think of the different scenarios when how one could interpret uh, your guard, right, being up. Is that tension? Is it some sort of defense against something? You're stressed about something, right? There's some sort of energy here where you're not maybe at ease, right? It sounds like kind of in this stressed state. So I guess going back to the very basics of this two-part series would be being aware of that, first of all, right? And then having again, the self-compassion would just be like, okay, I'm feeling kind of stressed right now, or I'm feeling like I can't connect. And so, okay, and take a deep breath, right? Like that's what's happening. We forget to breathe sometimes. We're always breathing, but we're tensed up, right? This is tense breathing. So let me just pause for a moment and take some breaths and be with my breath. And that's where Dr. Lidstone said, put my hand to my heart and connect, right? There's a heart to everything. There's a heart to our mind and body and soul. There's a heart to medicine, there's a heart to teaching, there's a heart to the universe. So why not connect to the center of it? Because it's with us and it's everywhere around us. So maybe in that moment, kind of connecting to your heart. And now I think in that moment, there's so many ways to kind of look at this, because I don't know exactly what someone might be perceiving or stating when they're saying their guard is kind of up, but trying to let in laughter and emotion, let in some laughter and levity, right? I think that's healing, as Dr. Shapiro was saying, and Dr. Lidstone too, that adding that in, and maybe you can in that moment kind of watch that stress or that guarded kind of feeling and decide, what am I going to do right now with that? It's helpful to reflect and be aware of where that's coming from. I think that's getting to the deeper source, right? What's underneath that? Is that something relationally? Is that something from my early childhood? Is that stress from work? Is it all of the above? Is it something with my identity? Right? That's where you start to go into the exploration to maybe release that. And so I think that would be a completely different approach than, what do I do in the moment if I'm trying to work through all of that, but also be present, right? So putting that on a shelf, like you said, Kelly, it's a tool we use all the time in therapy and mindfulness. There's a chest. I have some people open up a chest when they come in, and we're going to put certain things in the chest, and we only have this out on the table. So maybe using that as like just in that moment. But then I think there has to be this exploration of what's guarding, right? What's the stress? And how do we explore that with non-judgment, with curiosity? And maybe there's some pain to that stress. If we release the pain and we sit with someone in that pain, that's healing, right? We all carry pain with us, but we don't need our pain to lead to suffering, because then we're stuck, right? We all have to have, there is pain. Pain is human. To err is human, right? But let's not bury that pain, which causes stress, which may cause some guarding. So I think you got to explore and get access to that too. And then we lift it up, right? That's where you lift it up, you start to heal, you start to breathe, so that you can be with, right? We're human beings. We like to be with. We don't want to do. We're not human doers. We're human beings. We want to be with people. So yeah, so that's kind of just what came up to my mind in the moment.
Thank you. That was great. And as you were talking, two things came to my mind in terms of bringing it back to being curious and having psychological flexibility. Two questions we can ask. One is simply, what am I feeling? And the second is, what is this person trying to tell me? So sometimes kids, because mine are not very young, so they're not very good at communicating all the time. But I think this could be true of a lot of developmental stages when kids regress and they are not able to communicate, and it gets frustrating and our guard goes up. I think a question to ask is, what are they trying to tell me? And something that is always stuck in my mind is that the most effective way to communicate with others is to validate. So if we can understand what this person is trying to tell me and validate, and understand what we're feeling, those things together can kind of just, I think, de-escalate maybe, and bring guards down and help us to connect with others. So what am I feeling? What are they trying to tell me?
And I'll quickly add, self-compassion can lead to more emotional safety for yourself, and that can open yourself up to more positive emotions like gratitude and joy, and being really present with those around you who you love and appreciate and admire. And that can, create a contagion, a positive contagion of like letting others be more authentic and kind to themselves, leading to just a circle of betterment for everyone. So yes, emotional safety, and making sure that, we're able to connect in really mindful ways.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Every time I get to listen to you, incredible women, I am in awe and leave so inspired to go and do all of the good things for myself and others. So thank you so much for that. And I will be practicing gratitude every day because of this as well. But yeah, once again, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Lidstone, Dr. Shapiro, and Dr. Brar, for being here with us today and for sharing your wisdom, um, and all of the information that you have, and from all of your different perspectives. You've taken the wealth of knowledge that you know, and you've created tangible ways for us to take the information and implement it into our daily lives. And I forever am grateful for that, as I'm sure many other people listening in today are. Once again, I just want to thank all of the parents and the community members that are listening today for being a part of this. And I hope that you are able to take something, or many, many things, as I will, from this conversation, and implement it into your relationships, and your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others. And once more, like, huge shout out to Rady Children's Hospital and the incredible team over there for making these monthly events possible. Without you, and this opportunity, I think that there would be a lot of parents less informed or feeling a little more out of control. I, for one, am one of them. So I appreciate the opportunity each month to learn from all of you. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, and I hope all of you have a wonderful evening. We'll see you later.